2 for 1 this morning. Vincent's name is not on the program, and this is no fault of Heather's. Who ever heard of 2 people giving a homily? But here we are. We've done it together for a number of years, and we'd love to share this style with you. At the end of April, as this congregation spent, I think it was 3 weeks in the service talking about the environmental crisis and our responsibility for confronting this potential planetary disaster. The interesting thing is that one of the most destructive and polluting endeavors on this earth is rarely talked about in these discussions, and that is war. So on this Memorial Day weekend, when we remember those dear ones who have lost their lives in war, it seems only fitting that we spend some time looking at alternatives to war and violence so that the next generation or generations to come of men and women all over the world do not have to die in this way. Nonviolence was such a central part of the teachings of Jesus that for the first 300 years after his death, Christians were pacifists. In fact, there are records of trials where young Christians were brought before the Romans and asked to serve in their army. And their response would be, "I cannot serve, I am a Christian." And they were put to death. And then in 312, a Roman warlord by the name of Constantine supposedly saw a cross in the sky before a big battle. And so he bargained with God, and he said, "If I win this battle and I become an emperor, I will become a Christian, and I will convert all my troops to Christianity." Well, Constantine won. He converted his troops. And as a priest in Mexico once told me, we have lived in Constantinian captivity ever since. The contradiction between Christianity and militarism was dissolved, at least on the surface. So today we are going to explore and celebrate Jesus' teachings of nonviolence, his vision of shalom, his wanting us to embrace the enemy, embrace the foreigner, embrace those who are not like us, the whole human family. And we're going to do it through poetry, as the psalmist did, and also through stories, because this was Jesus' favorite way of teaching.
Our presentation is called In Search of Shalom. Let us speak of ancient visions and voices of peace.
Let us speak of ancient healing and ancient wholeness.
Let us also speak of today's longing for light and love.
Let us speak of today's thirst for justice and peace.
Let us speak of shalom.
Let us speak of that shalom, the ancient, the future, the always present peace of God.
Shalom, proclaimed by prophets with burning eyes.
Shalom, sung sweetly by psalmists of old.
Shalom, expanded by Jesus to include loving not only our neighbors, but loving also our enemies.
Let us celebrate the sweet joy of shalom when justice and peace embrace.
When the morning stars sing together with the sons and daughters of God shout for joy.
But how can we celebrate God's peace when the rivers of earth run red with blood?
How can we speak of peace when brother kills brother and sister wounds sister?
How can we speak of healing and wholeness when we rend the body of humanity with knives of hate?
How can we speak of wholeness in a world of brokenness?
We too are broken. We cannot remain unbroken.
So let us remember those who are beacons of shalom, those whose visions and voices give light even in the darkest night.
Let us speak of those who fought for freedom without destroying the freedom of others.
Those who sought justice with the tools of justice.
Those who struggled for peace with peaceful actions.
We've had enough of the voices of violence. We've had enough of the cries of anger.
Let us celebrate the peace heroes and the peace heroines.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God.
Let us speak of William Penn and the Holy Experiment.
Back in 1681, King Charles II of England signed a charter giving the territory known as Pennsylvania and parts of Delaware also to William Penn. Penn was a devout Quaker, and he wanted to found a colony based on the teachings of Jesus to see whether people could actually live out the love of neighbor and the love of enemy. He wanted to see what love could do, and he called it the Holy Experiment. The first thing that William Penn did, entering into this new land, was to visit the various Indian tribes that lived there, the Delaware Indians. He traveled without a bodyguard, without weapons, and he went into their villages in a spirit of friendship and understanding. He listened to their stories, and he gave them a fair price for the lands which the settlers wanted to settle upon. The native peoples were so taken with this that they were willing to sign a great treaty of peace with William Penn and the Quakers. In this treaty, they not only had the usual legal niceties, but they also had a very unique provision saying that the colonists would open their homes and their hearts to their neighbors, the Delaware Indians. And the Delaware Indians, in turn, said they would open their villages in a spirit of friendship and hospitality. This was totally unique among the colonies. They also set up a council of 6 Quakers and 6 Indians that would settle any disputes that came about. Because peace is not the lack of conflict, but peace is the way that people settle conflict without weapons, but with words and with trust. And so for almost half a century, in Pennsylvania, there were no Indian wars, unlike the rest of the colonies. There was peace and there was prosperity. And people came from all over the world, particularly groups that had been persecuted, like the Amish and the Mennonites and the free thinkers. They flocked to Pennsylvania. But also came people who didn't believe in those principles of justice and peace. People who believed in greed, people who believed in self-interest above all. And gradually the Pennsylvania Assembly was overwhelmed with non-Quakers. And the Quakers resigned in protest. Maybe it was a mistake on their part, because the Holy Experiment began to decline. One thing that survived, however, was the principle of freedom of religion. Remember, this was a time when Catholics were persecuting Protestants, and Protestants were persecuting Catholics. Catholics and Protestants were together persecuting Jews and Quakers and Amish and Indians. The idea of freedom of religion was a radical concept. It existed nowhere else in the world. The philosopher Voltaire looked across the ocean at this and said, this was a golden age of humanity when people could open their hearts to one another in freedom of worship. And even today, in this very place, we practice that precious legacy, freedom to worship as our conscience dictates.
Let us give thanks for the visions and the voices of William Penn and the Quakers, whose flickering light of shalom guides us still, even in the dark tunnel of the world.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God.
Let us speak further of those who laid down a foundation of hope in a season of despair.
Let us speak of Ellen Mansour and the children of Ramallah, Palestine.
It is June of 1989, and Vincent and I have taken a group of Jews and Christians from Wisconsin to Israel and Palestine, and we have met with peacemakers on all sides of that issue. It's been a very hard and long week, but a wonderful week in many ways. But on Sunday morning, we decided that we would like to go and share the worship with a 100-year-old Quaker community in Ramallah in the West Bank. However, as we approach the meeting house, we see this terrifying sight of soldiers firing on a group of children. It turns out that these children had daily protested the fact that their school had been closed, and they would come and gather peacefully to protest that. It had been a year and a half they could not go to school, and that was when we were there. That boycott, the Israelis kept those schools closed for much longer. But upon arriving at the meeting house, we entered this quiet, peaceful room, and I know there was a table with one peace rose right in the middle. But we were sort of still frightened and shaken by what we had experienced outside. So we looked around, sort of trying to get a sense of what was happening, and we realized that the adults had not begun their worship yet. This was still time for Sunday school. Well, our first thought was maybe we should go and sit among the children. They must need comforting with all the screaming and the shooting going on outside. But we soon learned that it would be the children that would comfort us. There, under the direction of a very petite but powerful woman in her 70s, Helen Mansour, the children were being taught a song, and the song went like this: "Be careful what you do with your hands, be careful what you do with your hands. There is someone up above who is looking down with love, so be careful what you do with your hands." And this song went on: "Be careful what you do with your mouth, be careful what you do with your feet." It was really a song about making intentional choices about how you want to live in this world, how you want to act. And it was a song of love and nonviolence in the midst of all that oppression. And as I sat there and cried because of all the suffering and hope that I was experiencing, Helen began to teach a Sunday school lesson to the children, transcending all the violence and the yelling, the soldiers outside her door. She chose to teach the children those last words of Jesus on the cross: "Forgive them, for they know not what they do."
Let us give thanks for the gift of Ellen and these children, and may our own children walk in their pathway of love.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God.
Let us speak further of those who laid down the foundations of hope in a season of despair.
Let us speak of the Polish Solidarity Union and its nonviolent victory over communism.
In the 1980s, Jane and I, along with our family, were privileged to spend 2 summers teaching in Poland. It was a bleak period for most of the Polish people. There were long lines for basic materials. But even more bleak than that was the fact that the country was under martial rule. General Jaruzelski had seized control of the country because he felt that there was a counter-revolutionary group trying to overthrow the communist government. That group was Solidarność, the Solidarity Workmen's Union. It was a faith-based movement that had started up in the north of Poland, in Gdansk, in a massive strike in the Lenin shipyards. But it was pledged to nonviolence, and it was supported by the Catholic Church there. When General Jaruzelski arrested the leaders, Lech Wałęsa and Adam Michnik and many others, the secret police also kidnapped Father Popiełuszko, the foremost Solidarity priest in the country. He was tortured to death. General Jaruzelski thought this would terrify people into silence and submission. But remarkably enough, just the opposite. There were massive nonviolent protests led by priests and nuns. Even the Pope, John Paul II, spoke out. Indeed, he came to Poland. He gave a public mass in Krakow attended by over 1 million people. Kind of remarkable given that the population of the city was normally 500,000. Because of this massive nonviolent protest, General Jaruzelski decided to pacify the population a little bit by allowing some limited voting for a few seats in the parliament from non-communist parties. He was shocked to discover that the communist candidates lost almost every single seat. And from that point on, it was just a matter of months before the general himself was on his way to retirement. General elections took place, and the new president of the first democratic state of Eastern Europe since World War II was Lech Walesa. Lech Walesa later won the Nobel Peace Prize for his leadership in this nonviolent, faith-based movement. He gave all his money and the medallion, the Nobel medallion itself, to the church. Thus it was that this nonviolent movement spread from Poland to Czechoslovakia, to Hungary, to Lithuania, to Latvia, to Estonia, finally to East Germany, and there we saw the fall of the Berlin Wall. NATO, with all of its armies and weapons, all of its millions of dollars on works of death, had not been able to free 1 square inch of communist-dominated territory in 50 years. Yet the nonviolent people power movement, beginning in Poland and spreading throughout Central Europe and ultimately to Russia itself with the fall of the Soviet Union, had overcome, nonviolence had overcome the violent system of totalitarian communism.
Let us give thanks for the witness of these nonviolent revolutionaries, and may we have the courage to confront oppression in our country.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God.
Let us speak again about those who laid down a foundation of hope in a season of despair.
Let us speak of the pastoral team of Arquitao, El Salvador.
It's August of 1990, and I am part of a delegation of 5 women from Madison to visit our sister city, Arquitao, El Salvador, near the Honduran border. There has been a civil war going on for 10 years or more, a bloody civil war, and up to 30,000 people have been killed. But the peace accords were signed, but now it is several months later, and the killings and the intimidations continue. Farmers are shot at as they tried to harvest their field, and community leaders are abducted and tortured. So the community of Arquitao contacted us and asked that we send a delegation, and that they wanted us to meet and bear witness to their suffering and to also take testimony of the violations of the peace accord. So we take testimonies from council members and teachers, from farmers, from medical staff. And now it is time to meet with the people who carry on the work of liberation theology. And I find myself in this lovely, simple wooden church in this little mountain village, and I'm sitting in a circle of elder women, all with gray hair, like me. And these are women who have lost their husbands, their children, their relatives, and their families. It was amazing that these women would take up this task of being on the pastoral team. After so many years, we've seen so much, is how they would preface their stories, and they would tell stories of abductions and tortures and assassinations. But these deeply religious women could not be stopped. They would organize Bible studies and peace marches. They demanded the end of the militarization of this beautiful country, and they demanded that there be equitable distribution of resources. And they also demanded that the peace accords be signed. I listened to the leader of the pastoral team, and she talks about how dangerous it really is to be called to this activity, to be on this pastoral team. Because as you remember, in the years during this war, many clergy and laity were killed, among them the 4 women religious, Archbishop Romero, the 4 Jesuit priests and their housekeeper. It was a very dangerous time to be affiliated with liberation theology. Tragically, the people were murdered by death squads, which the U.S. had sponsored in this country. Liberation theology had been a threat to the status quo. When I asked these women what gave them the courage to go on, why would they keep doing this? They said, we really identify deeply with Jesus. He was poor like we were. He was persecuted. He lived under military occupation. His life was very much like ours. And then she went on to explain that they use the Bible as a reference, and they keep asking themselves this question: what should I be doing in this moment of history? What an amazing question, a question we could all be asking ourselves. And then she looked at me, and she said with great compassion, you must always remember that if you choose the path of Jesus, you have to risk the cross.
Let us give thanks for these women whose faith overcame their fear of torture and death.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God.
These Christians have received the covenant of shalom and have borne it up like a torch for all of us to see.
Now, what have we learned from these messengers of shalom?
We've learned that the covenant of peace requires not weakness, but strength,
Not passivity, but activity.
not safety, but risk,
The warriors of shalom fight without violence,
without hate,
without guns.
without rockets of death.
They struggle only with the power of truth, love, and the yearning for justice.
These messengers of peace are bearers of God's redemptive love for this broken world.
And now we are called forth.
We are called to the challenge of shalom.
We are called to find the courage to lift up the light of God's peace in this darkened world.
How can we receive the strength and the courage to go forth as messengers of shalom, bearers of the torchlight of peace?
How can we take up the light of God's love in our hearts,
In our homes
in our communities?
and in the world,
We are suspended between death and a difficult birth,
between despair and a sunlit hope,
between a long night and the break of day.
shalom. It's God's grief, love, and hope entwined in the heart of the world.
We are called to the challenge of shalom.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God.
Thank you.